This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
We don't need to talk about the extreme hype that the X100V has received in detail, but what if you are considering a fixed lens camera? The X100V and the Leica Q2 are considered probably the best of the best. So which is right for you? I've used both the Fuji X100V and the Leica Q2 for everyday life and specifically a lot of street photography. So I thought I would share my opinion. Throughout this video, when either one of these cameras obviously stands out in a certain area, I will create like a tally point system on screen so we can see objectively which camera gains the most points. The fixed lenses and sensors are probably the biggest feature differences, so let's discuss that first. The Fuji X100V has a 23mm lens on an APS-C sensor, which is a full frame equivalent of a 35mm focal length, whereas the Q2 has a 28mm lens on a full frame sensor. Only you will know your preference here. What focal length do you prefer for the things that you like taking photos of? I've spoken to people who have immediately dismissed the Leica Q2 purely because it is a 28mm lens. So for them, the obvious decision was the Fuji X100V's 35mm. Focal length preferences to one side for a second, let's compare the lenses themselves. A lot of people will say that you're buying the Q2 almost entirely because of its impressive lens. The manual focus on that lens is a dream to use, which I cannot say the same thing about the X100V. Also, the zone focusing measurements on the Q2 are absolutely fantastic for street photographers, so that's another box ticked for me. I'll talk more about usability and build quality in more detail later on, but physically and aesthetically, the X100V's 23mm lens cannot really be compared to the Leica Q2's 28mm lens, so Leica gains the first point here. Moving on to sensors and overall image quality. Again, it's not really even a debate. The files that come out of the Q2 are absolutely incredible. That lens that we just spoke about a second ago creates some of the sharpest images I've ever used. So objectively, comparing the full frame 47 megapixel Q2 files with the 24 megapixel crop sensor files on the X100V, I think the specs speak for themselves. However, if I wasn't here comparing the two cameras, I would still say how beautiful the images are that come out of the Fuji. I also like to remember that most people are looking at photos on a screen. So there's a minimum threshold of quality that almost every modern camera surpasses anyway. So does image quality really matter? That's probably a conversation for another video. But for the sake of making this comparison, yes, the Q2 is getting another point on image quality. I would definitely say that the X100V has more features and is more versatile for the everyday user. The adjustable screen, for example, is super helpful, especially with people maybe doing a bit of street photography and shooting from the hip. However, I will say that because the 28mm on the Q2 is a little bit wider, I am a little bit more confident in firing away without being too accurate because I know I probably won't miss too much of the action. Whereas the 35mm focal length on the X100V is tighter, so you need to concentrate a little bit more on your compositions. But like I said, that's why the screen is so helpful, so I'm gonna give the Fuji a point here. The X100V also has an inbuilt flash, and I know most people won't be using this every day, but it is a nice feature to have, and I've dabbled with a little bit of flash photography with my street stuff, and it's fun. The Q2 simply does not have this feature, so another point to the Fuji here. Another feature which I think is absolutely amazing on the X100V is being able to switch from the EVF to the OVF with a switch of a button on the front of the camera. We're looking at screens all day, every day. I am, especially with my job, so it's nice that when I go out and take photos, I can look through an optical viewfinder instead of another screen. The Q2 just does not have this feature, so another point to the Fuji.
We will get back to the video in just a second, but I wanted to quickly share with you today's sponsor, Squarespace. I have personally been using Squarespace for years as the all-in-one place to run my online business. With hundreds of beautiful templates to choose from, creating an online space that feels like your own has never been easier. I use Squarespace to sell my presets, organize and showcase my photography, and have recently shared more personal work with my audience via a weekly newsletter. I cannot recommend Squarespace enough, so why not at least start a free trial and see what you think. After that, when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Mike Chudley to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now let's get back to the video. In regards to ergonomics, I do believe you need to try these cameras yourself. They are very different.
I know people that love the Leica feel while others do not get on with it at all. I will say personally that when I pick up the Q2, it's one of the nicest cameras I've ever used. And then when I go to pick up my X100V, it kind of feels like a toy. But in regards to getting a job done and taking photos, does that matter too much? I don't know, to some people it definitely does. The way it feels on the Q2 to adjust the shutter speed, change your aperture, and even press the shutter button itself, it's the closest thing I've experienced to magic. Whereas on my X100V, although the body feels good enough, the shutter button has been stuck a few times in my experience, which has needed a touch of WD-40 to loosen. And there's also a chip underneath the shutter button, which I have no clue how that happened. The X100V looks and feels great. I'm really struggling to say anything negative about this camera. But compared to the Q2, that's where that German engineering really shines. Leica's getting another point here. Although the Leica Q2 and the X100V are priced very differently, they're both easy and playful cameras. They're not too serious. That doesn't mean you can't get professional results from them, because you certainly can, but they're not meant to be used like workhorses, not like your flagship Canon or Sony cameras anyway. In the professional world, I find that these cameras really shine in more incognito situations and more behind the scenes candid work. I do think that the X100V is more fun and more approachable, and if people were able to buy it, I have seen this camera reignite a love for photography for people. Features on the X100V, like the film simulations, have created a community of people all sharing an appreciation for the same thing, and ultimately giving you a reason to pick up the camera for fun. I would happily recommend the X100V to people who have never even picked up a camera before. Whereas the Leica Q2 is certainly a little more niche, and for most people, I don't find myself recommending it, and the price is a big reason for that. The Q2 is luxury and nobody needs it. And for a better price, there are other small body 28mm combinations available elsewhere. When comparing and recommending cameras, we simply cannot ignore the price tag. For two cameras that can be used in basically all of the exact same situations, the X100V is less than half the price of the Q2, so it feels way more appropriate to recommend. So if we're talking value for money, the X100V is hard to beat, so I'm going to give another point to the Fuji. However, that doesn't stop people being attracted to the Q2's craftsmanship, the image quality, and overall luxury appeal. Why do people buy Rolex watches when Casio will tell you the exact same time? I used the X100V for over a year before buying the Q2. It did almost everything I needed it to, and I love that camera. But I did feel like the 35mm was somewhat limiting with some of the street photography that I wanted to shoot, and the Q2 felt like the only option that would be better. But also, yes, I will address the comments here, I was sold by Leica's brand appeal, but I'm okay with that. I wanted a Leica. I thought the Fuji X100V was simple and efficient, but the Leica Q2 is even more so. The Q2 really does strip away the gimmicks and the distractions and makes the camera feel very intentional, which ultimately allows me to focus on what really matters, my awareness and what's in front of me when shooting. So with all that being said, how did the points stack up here? Do you think this comparison was fair? Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to reading them, as I know people online get very passionate about camera gear. I love both cameras, I use both cameras, so hopefully this isn't too biased towards the Q2, which I think maybe it sounds like I do prefer, because I do, but the X100V is still fantastic. So that's enough waffle. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.